Quantum immortality. Hi everyone. I'm not entirely sure how to categorize what I've experienced, but I wanted to share it. While I'm skeptical about the whole Matrix hypothesis, I do believe in the possibility of alternate universes. Some people have described my situation as a form of quantum immortality, but that doesn't feel quite right either. Here's what's been happening. I've seen my own death more times than I can count. The first and most frequent occurrence happened when I lived in Federal Way, Washington. I didn't drive at the time, so I often walked to work. One day, as I waited to cross the street, a garbage truck came around the corner a little too fast. Nothing actually happened, but as soon as it passed me, I was flooded with a vivid memory and a slight physical sensation of the truck tipping over and crushing me. It scared me so badly that I developed a phobia of garbage trucks. And it didn't just happen once. This exact scenario has replayed multiple times. Another time, I walked out of the store where I worked early one morning and saw a plane crash into the building, just 3 days before Christmas. But again, it wasn't something I actually saw with my eyes. It felt like a memory being uploaded to my brain right after it happened. There have been other instances too. Once, while my husband and I were on a bus to Seattle, the driver had a heart attack. I had vivid memories of us crashing into oncoming traffic. Or worse, going over the edge of a cliff. But in reality, nothing ever happened. Every time, it feels like a version of me has died, and their final memories are somehow sent to my brain. It's as if I'm living the aftermath of their deaths, carrying their final thoughts or sensations. For a while, these occurrences were happening so frequently that it really freaked me out. Lately, though, they've slowed down. I'm not sure if that means I'm not dying as often, or if my connection to these other me's is just weaker now. I've tried explaining this to family and friends, but I'm pretty sure most of them think I'm either making it up or that something's wrong with me mentally. That's why I'm sharing it here. I feel like people in this space might understand. My soulmate in a dog's body. Hi everyone, I hope this fits here. I just found this community, and so many of your stories resonate with me. I wanted to share one of my own. If soulmates exist, I wholeheartedly believe my dog Jake was one of mine. From the moment I met him, something told me we had been together in past lives, and were meant to be together in this one. Jake was one of 12 puppies, born to my aunt's dog, Maya. They live in the country, and their dogs tend to roam freely. One day, Maya showed up pregnant, and not long after, I was at a sleepover with my cousins when I got to meet the litter. The puppies were so tiny, they fit in the palm of your hand. I was immediately drawn to Jake. He was one of the only brown males in the litter. All the other brown ones were girls, and all the black ones were boys. My aunt was trying to find homes for the puppies, but I knew my parents didn't want another dog. We already had a German Shepherd, so I didn't even ask. A few months passed, and during another sleepover with my cousins, I was thrilled to see that Jake was still there. By then, the puppies were about 7 weeks old. Still little, but no longer newborns. There were only 5 left, and Jake immediately attached himself to me. For 2 days, he followed me everywhere. He even jumped into the pool after me. It felt like he was saying, "You're my human." When my mom came to pick me up, I stood in the driveway holding Jake, surrounded by my cousins, with the biggest grin on my face. She immediately knew I was about to ask for something. As I explained why we needed Jake, my cousins all chimed in to back me up. To my surprise, my mom agreed, but with a condition. I had to prove I could take care of him during a 2-week trial period. If I wasn't responsible enough, we'd bring him back. I was 11 at the time, and I took this challenge seriously. That summer, I slept on the couch next to Jake's crate so I could take him out whenever he whined. During the day, I spent all my time training him and caring for him. Needless to say, I passed the trial, and Jake became my best friend. For 14 years, Jake was by my side. Whenever I went to a sleepover or a Girl Scout camp, my family told me he'd sit by the door, waiting for me to come home. In 2017, I moved out of my parents' house and, heartbreakingly, couldn't take Jake with me. Space was tight, and he had a younger dog sibling who adored him. I didn't want to separate them, but I only lived 30 minutes away and made sure to visit often. I took him on play dates and even to the dog salon for spa days. Still, I always feared losing him while I wasn't there. In October 2021, I had a playdate with Jake, and something felt different. He was old by then. He'd had 2 ACL surgeries and was moving slowly. But that day, something in me kept saying, "Give him all your attention." I put my phone down and just lay beside him, petting him while he relaxed. That evening, as my parents returned home, I saw Jake stumble into the living room and immediately knew something was wrong. I had planned to leave, but every instinct told me to stay. About 30 minutes later, it became clear Jake was in his final moments. With his head in my lap, surrounded by my mom, dad, brother, partner, and his little dog sibling, Jake took his last breath. I petted him until the very end. I don't know what made me aware that this would be his last day, but I'm so grateful I listened to whatever it was. Maybe it was Jake himself, waiting for me to be there before he left. Jake was more than a pet. He was my best friend, my soulmate in this life, and I truly believe I'll see him again in the next. A creepy walk through the graveyard. Not long after moving to a new house, I took my 6-year-old daughter to the playground. On the way home, she started complaining about being tired, so I checked Apple Maps for a shortcut. The quickest route led us through a graveyard. At first, everything was normal. The sun was shining, and birds were singing. But as we walked deeper into the cemetery, the atmosphere completely shifted. The air felt flat, heavy, and oppressive. The birds went silent, and the world seemed eerily still. What really struck me was how the gravestones were arranged. Some were facing the wrong direction, sideways or backward, as if someone had scattered them haphazardly. A massive pile of dirt leaned against the church, adding to the surreal feeling. I tried to keep things light for my daughter, but she noticed too and said, "This is horrible. I don't like it here." At that point, my Apple Maps started glitching, sending us in random directions. I followed the path until we finally reached the main street. As soon as we did, everything shifted back to normal. The birds started chirping, the sun seemed brighter, and we could hear the hum of traffic again. The next week, we went back to show my husband. The oppressive vibe was gone, and the gravestones were neatly arranged. It felt completely normal, peaceful even. Other realities. I've been trying to piece together my experiences in a way that makes sense, like following breadcrumbs. Honestly, there are times I don't even want to think about it. It makes me feel like I'm losing my mind, or that I might sound crazy. Some days I feel more open to sharing, and on others I worry about how this could all be used against me. Isn't that what happens to people who think outside the norm? We end up pushed to the fringes, unable to meet others except in those same shadows. Over the past few years, I've had some experiences that go beyond the ordinary, moments of two-way communication. In the beginning, it felt like I was talking to myself, except it clearly wasn't me. It was someone else, someone who looked just like me, as if they had the exact same DNA but came from a completely different reality. The best way I can describe it is like a daydream, though it happened when my guard was down. My mental defenses weren't as rigid, and I wasn't as tied to what I believed was real. I think more people could have these experiences if we weren't so attached to the physical world around us, or even our own ideas of what reality is. To be clear, I wasn't high or under the influence. I do believe psychedelics might help prepare the mind for these kinds of connections, but I don't think they're necessary. The human mind, on its own, can reach these levels of awareness and communication. For me, these moments often happened later in the day, when I was tired. Not sleepy, but just worn down enough for my mind to wander. These weren't dreams. I've had vivid dreams that I believe were glimpses into other realities, but what I'm talking about here is different. It felt like I was communicating with another version of myself, or with others from entirely different realities. It was never something I initiated, at least not consciously. Sometimes I'd be talking, and I'd see the person I was speaking to, someone not from here. They'd ask me a question, and then, just like that, my vision would snap back to my surroundings, and I'd realize I was answering them out loud. These weren't out-of-body experiences or astral projection. I was still physically present in my reality, but somehow, these other realities had the technology to reach me where I was. I know this all sounds bizarre. If you think I'm crazy, I don't blame you. I've thought the same thing about myself, but I'm sharing this because I want to know if anyone else has experienced something similar. At one point, it felt like I was communicating with 3 different realities simultaneously. Then, things shifted. The others I was communicating with didn't seem like alternate versions of myself anymore. Instead, they were people I'd never seen before. Strangers who looked like they were from another time, wearing clothes from the 1940s or 1950s. One vivid encounter involved a group of 3 people. One person sitting at a desk wearing what looked like old Walkman-style headphones around their temples, and 2 others, a man and a woman, standing behind them. The person at the desk seemed to be the one doing the communicating. At one point, I caught a glimpse of an entire room filled with these groups of 3, an auditorium-sized space with rows of desks. Each desk had someone seated, with 2 others standing behind them. Since moving to a new town a couple of months ago, these experiences have stopped. For context, I'm a veteran, and during my time in Iraq, I was injured twice in explosions. I had my head thoroughly checked through the VA, thinking maybe something was wrong, but nothing concerning came up. I have so many theories about what this could all mean, but they're just theories. If other realities exist, who's to say what year they're in? Just because we're in the 2020s doesn't mean they are. And maybe there's something about sharing the same genetic makeup or DNA that allows communication between versions of ourselves in different realities. The more I think about it, the more questions I have. I'm grateful for spaces like Reddit, where people share their experiences. Reading about others' stories gives me the courage to keep exploring this mystery. If anyone else has had anything similar happen to them, or if you have ideas about what's going on, I'd love to hear them. The Strange Case of Lorina Garcia Gordo. On a seemingly ordinary day in July 2008, I found myself reaching out to an online forum for help. My name is Lorina Garcia Gordo, and I was 41 years old at the time. I needed to share the bizarre and unsettling experience I was going through. To this day, I believe I woke up in a parallel universe, a world eerily similar to the one I had known, yet subtly and profoundly different. That morning began as usual, but one small detail immediately felt off. The color of my bed sheets was different. It was such a minor change, yet it set the tone for the strange reality I was about to face. Shrugging it off, I got ready for work, where I'd been employed for over 20 years. Everything seemed normal at first. My commute, the streets, the familiar rhythm of the day. But when I arrived at my office, unease crept in. There were faces I didn't recognize. New employees, perhaps? But when I reached my office door, my name was no longer there. Confused, I thought I might have gone to the wrong floor, but a quick check confirmed I was exactly where I was supposed to be. My desk, however, belonged to someone else. In a panic, I opened my laptop to check company records. My name was still listed, but I was assigned to a different manager and a department I had never worked in. My personal details, address, phone number, and credentials remained unchanged, but my professional life had inexplicably shifted. Frantic, I examined my credit cards, ID, and driver's license. Everything looked correct, yet the growing inconsistencies gnawed at me. Unable to focus, I left work and went to see a doctor. After a battery of tests, they found nothing. No drugs, no illness, no neurological issues. I considered the possibility of amnesia, but I had no gaps in my memory. Desperate for answers, I turned to the internet, searching for clues. My accounts and emails were intact, the news matched what I remembered, and world events aligned with my understanding of reality. But then I reached a breaking point. 6 months earlier, I had ended a long-term relationship and started dating a man named Augustine. We'd spent months together, and I'd even met his son. Yet when I called him, a stranger answered and insisted no one by that name lived there. It was as if Augustine and our entire relationship had never existed. My family, too, added to the disorientation. When I mentioned my sister's recent shoulder surgery, they stared at me blankly, insisting it had never happened. My world had shifted. Clothes I didn't recognize filled my wardrobe. Blog posts I had written were missing. Even email exchanges were gone. Yet the broader world, the news, politics, and global events, remained unchanged. I began to wonder, had I somehow crossed into a parallel universe? Was I the same Lorina, but living in a timeline where small details of my life had altered the course of my history? I teleported to a different realm. In the fall of 1934, I had an experience that still defies explanation, as though I stepped into another plane of existence. My fiancé and I were in a crowded elevator at a music store in Chicago, and when the doors opened, I mistakenly got off on the wrong floor. The elevator was too packed to let me back in, so I decided to wait for it to return. As I looked around, I realized something was wrong. I wasn't in the music store anymore. The walls, the lighting, even the atmosphere had completely changed. I found myself standing in what looked like a bustling train station. People rushed past me. Announcements echoed overhead, and I could see ticket counters with long lines of travelers. Everything felt real, too real, but I didn't recognize any of it. I tried asking for help, but no one acknowledged me. It was as though I was invisible. Growing more uneasy, I decided to head outside to get my bearings. When I stepped through the doors, I found myself in a city bathed in sunlight. It was beautiful, yet completely unfamiliar. As I wandered, I spotted a teenage boy standing on the sidewalk, looking as confused as I felt. Relieved to see someone who might understand, I approached him. To my surprise, he smiled at me and said, "I guess they let you off at the wrong stop too." His words sent a chill through me. The boy explained that he had been playing tennis in Lincoln, Nebraska. After stepping into a locker room to change his shoes, he somehow walked into the same strange train station where I had ended up. Neither of us could make sense of how we'd both been transported here, but having someone to share the experience with made it less frightening. We decided to explore together, hoping to find answers. As we walked, the scenery changed, and we found ourselves in the countryside. To my astonishment, I saw my fiancé's sister standing on a sandbar with a group of girls. They waved at me, calling out my name as if they could see me. The boy grew excited and said, "They might be a way back." Without hesitation, he stripped down to his tennis shorts, ready to swim out to them. "It's not far," he said. "I know I can make it." But no matter how hard he swam, he couldn't reach the sandbar. The distance never seemed to close, and eventually, he gave up, exhausted. When we looked again, the sandbar and the girls were gone. I felt a deep sense of despair. Would I ever find my way back to the life I knew? Then, just as suddenly as it had begun, everything went dark. I felt weightless, as if I were floating through space. When I opened my eyes, I was back in the music store, sitting on a stool with a magazine in my lap. The store was about to close, and the clerks were staring at me, clearly waiting for me to leave. My fiancé was downstairs, relieved to see me. He said he'd lost track of me in the elevator and waited for a while before heading home. Later, I discovered that my fiancé's sister and her friends had seen me that day. They teased me, saying I seemed so caught up in my conversation that I didn't even notice them. From their perspective, I had been the one who was distant and unreachable. The trail at Hocking Hills. It was September 20th, 2008, and my best friend Sierra and I decided to escape our busy lives for a day and hike at Hocking Hills, Ohio. It was a warm, sunny morning, the perfect day to explore the park's scenic trails, caves, and waterfalls. We set out early, just after sunrise, eager to make the most of the day. The trails were lively with other hikers, and everything felt normal at first. Around noon, we stopped to check our phones, laughing over pictures from a previous trip. Shortly after, we crossed a road and noticed a fire tower in the distance. Oddly, it had caution tape around it, and the windows were taped up and grimy. A strange, foul smell hung in the air, and flies swarmed the area. It was unsettling, but we dismissed it and decided to take a trail we hadn't noticed before. As we ventured deeper into the forest, the atmosphere began to change. Though it had been warm earlier, the temperature dropped suddenly, and we started to shiver in our light clothing. The day grew unnaturally dark, far earlier than it should have. Even stranger, the forest seemed to stretch endlessly. Normally, we would have been able to see the edges of the park, but the trees now seemed infinite. Worried, Sierra pulled out her phone to check Jeep, but her battery was nearly dead, and she couldn't get a signal. When I tried my phone, it was no better. The time display was malfunctioning, stuck on a strange error. We pressed on, trying to stay calm, but an eerie silence had taken over. No rustling leaves, no bird calls, just the sound of our footsteps echoing unnaturally in the quiet. Eventually, we came to a small hill where the trail passed between two large bushes, forming a kind of natural gate. Desperate for a way out, we pushed through the bushes, and everything changed. Suddenly, we were blinded by bright sunlight, and warmth flooded back as if we'd stepped into a different world. The sounds of rushing water, wind, and chatter from other hikers filled the air. We were now standing at the edge of Old Man's Cave, a popular spot with a large waterfall and a cliff overlooking the water. Shaken, we checked our phones again. This time, the clocks worked. It was 4 p.m., 3 hours later than we'd expected. Normally, the trail we had taken would have only taken an hour to walk. Somehow, we'd lost time without even realizing it. We tried to rationalize what had happened. Maybe the darkness was caused by heavy clouds, we thought. Perhaps the temperature drop was just a freak weather change. But when we returned to the bushes where we'd emerged, the trail we had been on was gone. We searched the area, but there was no sign of the dark path we'd walked through. It was as if it had never existed. On our way back to the parking lot, we passed the fire tower again. This time, it looked perfectly normal. There was no caution tape, no grime, and no strange smell. A woman with blonde hair was climbing the steps, and the area looked as it should have, bright and ordinary. Sierra and I joked nervously about stumbling into the fairy realms, but neither of us could shake the unease we felt. Whatever had happened on that trail, it wasn't something we could explain, and it left us questioning what we'd experience for years to come.